Welcome to The Shift, where I talk with some exceptional leaders and founders from government to Fortune 500 companies to exciting startups in hopes that you'll benefit from their stories, from their wisdom and from their mistakes, so you can shorten or maybe sharpen your own leadership journey. Welcome, Lord Andrew Mawson OBE, to the podcast. What has been your pivotal leadership moment? I'm sure there's many, but can you pick one for us today?
Well, I suppose one of the moments that was important, what I call a critical change moment, was when my wife and I had left Bradford and I'd read theology in Manchester and became a Baptist minister, and I went for an interview to a Baptist church in Kingston-upon-Thames in Surrey. So our first move south. And we got on the train and went down to London, and I was picked up by Eric Blakeborough, who was a very entrepreneurial, imaginative Baptist minister who picked my wife and I up in his yellow open-top Morgan sports car. And Eric had pioneered in Kingston-upon-Thames in the middle of some serious drug issues and other things that were going on in that part of Surrey. An all-night club, a hostel, a whole range of arts programmes, the first walk-in medical surgery for addicts in the country, actually. And him and his family had really bought into doing something about that serious issue. They didn't talk about it. They didn't write academic reports about it. They got into the issue. And of course, they're still doing all of that. Eric's children and family grew up there, and we all got to know each other. We had our first child there. And they're still doing that all over Wales 50 odd years later. And Eric's still alive at 95 years of age. Unlike the state, which of course addresses these things in 3-year programmes, they stayed the course. And actually what that taught me as a young person, practical person, who'd left school at 16, bored, and had become an apprentice with British Telecom before it actually was the GPO at that time, public sector organisation, before I went to Manchester to read theology. What it taught me was that a small group of people with entrepreneurial leadership and an imaginative mindset could change the world, actually, and could do all sorts. It wasn't about policies and programs. It was fundamentally about people and about commitment and about the fundamental question, who cares? And what I discovered in Eric Blakeborough was a person who cared and was greatly respected by a whole range of people that used to come to that all-night club, actually, from very different backgrounds. I discovered in Surrey there was a whole world going on at 2 a.m. that most people wouldn't have imagined. And Eric was brilliant at engaging with people and relationships. So it was, I suppose, what I'd call nowadays a critical change moment.
And did he live with his family in that area?
He lived in the project, on the roof of the project, and so did we. So we got an apartment there. We had our first child there, lived with addicts and very damaged people, and a whole range of complications of human life. I think my mother from Bradford was originally concerned who we were living with. We understood that our way into those complicated social issues was to build a community and get interested in people and relationships. That's what Eric Blakeborough taught me. He understood all of that. It wasn't about process. It wasn't about ideology. It was all about people.
Well, I can definitely see through learning more and more about all of your projects that theme has had its legacy in all your projects as well. On the ground, what do people need? What can they not see? What are the innovations that are necessary?
But also, what are the entrepreneurial opportunities? Because sometimes we get lost in need questions. I think the Gospels remind us the poor will always be with us. I think that's true. The Gospels are describing the world as it is and always will be. What we began to really discover is look for opportunities, small opportunities, and get real about them and infect some of that, and that can have massive implications. Entrepreneurs know this. Focus on the detail and look for opportunity that can have a bigger impact.
So kudos to Eric. So from Bradford to Kingston and from Kingston to Bromley by Bow, tell us a bit about the Bromley by Bow Centre and the impact that's had on the community.
Yeah, well, I went to Bromley by Bow 1983-84, and it was the time of the Anglican report, Faith in the City, that the churches were writing. You've got to be a certain age to remember this. But it was really the churches worrying about what do you do with their 55,000 church buildings all over the country, many of which were underused. And so these church leaders wrote this report, and I read it when I first arrived in Bromley, and it was full of academic theories, And if I'm honest with you, here was I landing in a church in the middle of a housing estate in the heart of the East End of London, where 97% of everything was run by the state. Most of it didn't work. Michael Heseltine at that time, who I didn't know at that time but I do now, was just landing in a helicopter on a place called the Isle of Dogs, worrying about a thing called Canary Wharf, and an area which had 2 buses a day. You know, completely different world. And here's me landing in a barn-like church building with 12 elderly people, all in their late 70s, early 80s, sitting where they'd always sat in this 200-seater church, and it looked as though the dead had been carried out and no one had noticed. And here was me standing in a pulpit, meant to give words of wisdom to people who were 3 times my age. But I really liked these people, and when I stood back and thought, well, what do we actually have here in this mess? And there was quite a lot of violence and difficult stuff I could sense, and things not working outside the buildings. Well, at least we have some rundown buildings. This is the mind of an entrepreneur. We have some buildings. We have a bank account. That's a good start. It's only got 400 quid in it, but it's better having nothing in it. And we have 12 elderly people who haven't been to university, haven't become politically correct, who have a lived life, have lived through a war. One of them remembers walking along the street with Mahatma Gandhi, who stayed next door at Kingsley Hall in 1931 for the Round Table Conference on India, a building, by the way, that I became involved reopening with Sir Richard Attenborough, who was doing the film Gandhi at that point. But these were still early days. But what I realised was these were good people who cared about where they lived. And there were all these people arriving slowly from a place called Bangladesh. Well, if you're an East Ender, where on earth's Bangladesh? You know, and it's a fair question. So possibilities for tension and misunderstanding and all were very, very real. So the question to me was, on day one, what on earth do you do about that? Answer, I haven't got the faintest idea. My Yorkshire instinct from Bradford was, do a runner now and get out of here. It's all too much for you, Andrew. Particularly when I came across Philip, the Jewish head teacher in the school across the road, that was retiring at 55 because it had all become too much for him. And I thought, well, this is me at year 5 falling off my trolley, you know. So there were reasons to be concerned about it. But my wife and I decided we'd stay for a couple of years and see what happened. Here we are at year 41. And I suppose the way into what we started to do was because we got interested in people and some of the stuff I'd learned from Eric instinctually, and because my dad had been a milkman on the Thorpe Edge housing estate in Bradford, so I got used to getting up at 4 in the morning and running a little business and delivering milk and all, being practical about all of that stuff. And Bradford people, by the way, Yorkshire folk, are a bit like EastEnders. They're very blunt and in your face and say things that, you know, EastEnders could cope with all of that. They knew we weren't messing about, and so we started to get on really well. So that all sort of hit it off. And so as I loitered with intent, so I thought, I'm not going to sit in a study and write an academic document on poverty. And it's actually a way of avoiding Karen and her children on the 7th floor of the tower block across the road. I wanted to get to know Karen and her children, actually, and the dependency culture the state and many successive governments had created over the last 40, 50 years. So I started to loiter with intent to get to know them. And basically, to cut a long story short, what you found was the people who wanted to do stuff. And we began to partner with individuals, some who lived locally, some who have just appeared. So Janet turned up in a car with 3 kids. We had an empty, rundown church hall. Well, let's work together and build a dance school, but the best dance school in East London. By year 6, we have about 150 kids, a West Indian child's been off to place at the Royal Ballet. There's a whole range of stuff happening. Ding! And then we have a child, there's no decent nursery care. When you loiter with intent, you find Yvonne, a doctor down the road, who's got 12 kids in her living room, running a little nursery with her own kids. And Steve, her husband actually, not Yvonne, who had a real passion for childcare, so they came along. And we thought, well, why don't we just form a partnership? And I found an architectural business, and let's rip out the whole of the church, paint the walls white, sand the parquet floor, which came up brilliantly, put a tent-like canopy in the middle of it, which made of the same material as the Millennium Dome, but 15 years earlier. Build a beautiful church, because beauty happens. Let's not build a boring community centre. No. Let's build a centre of community. Quite a different thing. Let's build a beautiful church there for 40 people rather than 200. A bit more realistic when a third of the population now Muslim. Let's build an art gallery around it. Because when I loitered with intent, what I found was the largest artistic community outside New York. But no one in the state or the health service was understanding the relationship between art, creativity and health. So we began to build all these artistic colonies. By year 7, we were doing a 200-piece exhibition at the Concourse Gallery in the Barbican in the City of London with local people and artists. I mean, we started to just bring it all together. So let's build a church, let's build an art gallery, let's build the first integrated nursery of its kind in the country, actually, around this church, because I think children playing is really creative. I mean, churches should be about play and curiosity, not just formality, you know. And so we built all that, a business model and a balsa wood model, which now sits in the Science Museum, actually. And the expert from social services arrived about 38 years ago. And she pulled out of her bag like an encyclopedia of 1,000 reasons why nothing could happen in the world. And so I decided I'd be a dissenter, a non-conformist, you know, not ticking all their boxes. So I said to her, she was called Shirley, I said, Shirley, that encyclopedia is driving poverty and dependency cultures around here. I'm not going to follow it. It's time to move on from that process. Oh, we can't do that. There's all these rules and regulations, health and safety and all that. I need to see your boss. So John came down, the new director of Children's Services, I've never met before. And you can tell if they're the right people. It's always the right people with the right mindset. And actually within 3 minutes he's saying, I can build 10 of these for the cost of an expensive one on the Isle of Dogs. We built the first walking model of what became the model for children's centres all over the country. The Children's Centre movement in the Blair years was launched in Bromley by Bow by Charles Clarke and Margaret Hodge, as a matter of fact. And we were used as a model for that very joined-up way of working with families actually at that time, which we pioneered. I ended up running 4 of these things and growing them. What I noticed though, our first innovation, because we've built a lot of innovations, which people can see on my website, Andrew Mawson Partnerships. And then when we went to build our next nursery under the Children's Centre stuff, we found we didn't comply with their policies. At this point, you're laughing and thinking, welcome to the machinery of the civil service. And we wonder why people are so frustrated by this stuff, really. But it was some of our early learning by doing, actually, as we did our first innovation. So just to finish on that, so Bromley by Bow today, by following that entrepreneurial mindset, has about 370 staff. It's on a 3-acre site. We run a park. We have 55,000 patients. We built the first integrated working model of primary healthcare in the country. We have about 2,000 visitors a year. We built with local partners a housing company because we decided to take on the housing association movement. And that company called Poplar Harker now has 10,000 properties, owns 34% of the land in Poplar, and has about a £2.1 billion regeneration programme in play. And I was a director from day one for about 10 years, and we still all work together actually. So we built a whole range of organisations in East London, but it sort of began there, sort of getting interested in people.
And the dance school that you talked about, that actually broke off and went off by itself, didn't it? It became so successful that it could be its own entity.
Well, and also we were running out of space because our buildings were quite run down and we didn't have much money, so it needed to move, and so they found a bigger space. But again, we don't want to hoard everything. We want to let flowers bloom and let them grow and move on. And you know, it's the same, I think, with leadership. You don't want dependency on me. We need to grow leaders and grow people and allow things to grow and develop. We just today, the Richard Rogers architectural team, who are now called RHSP, have just done the designs on a new design actually for part of our site in Bromley by Bow. They describe Bromley by Bow as a modern secular monastery, which I think is pretty accurate actually. Pretty interesting as a secular team of architects to understand the granular detail with all the art and the gardens and the nurseries and the health bits and all that and its linkages. Monasteries have been known in the UK and Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years. We've all forgotten. Maybe we need to dig into our memory as a nation and wonder about these things.
That's an awesome compliment from Richard Rogers Architecture. Maybe I'll come visit Bromley by Bow and you can show me all this beautiful architecture one day. But the thing for me about leadership in there is you found people who wanted to do things.
Yeah.
Because you were loitering with intent and spending time with people, hanging out.
Yeah. Having cups of tea.
You realised who could actually join forces with you.
But with purpose, because I worry that sometimes the church, we've all got too much into doing good and being worthy and very nice and all of that stuff. And we've lost any business sense. I mean, the reason the church became a global organisation is because St. Paul realised the future wasn't in Jerusalem, it was in Rome. It's where the culture was going. He made money, he built relationships, he pointed out that women were going to be leaders. He did all sorts of things that broke them. That is how entrepreneurs are. Yet when I listen to so many of our church leaders, they've forgotten all about that. I remind them that the tradition of the Christian church, if we're in a Christian setting at this moment, The word became flesh. That's the words in John's Gospel. They didn't become minutes. They didn't become academic reports. They didn't become policies. They became flesh. And the Gospels are full of the stories of Jesus of Nazareth engaging with people with names and addresses. The man with the withered hand. The Syro-Phoenician woman. You're suddenly breaking into the Gentile world. All of that stuff is a learning by doing entrepreneurial behaviour. Yeah, I think we've forgotten about all of that. I think we really need to read those stories again and wonder about them. Get curious.
Time is of the essence, isn't it? And the thing that I seem to be seeing through all your projects is this joining of the dots between finding people who want to do things and build things that then creates community, that then creates stories.
I think that's exactly right. You find all these amazing people, and that's how our doctors at Year 10 originally joined in, and we found these doctors after dancing around with the NHS and really becoming aware that how much of the whole NHS stuff at primary care was about doctors' pensions. It wasn't about patients. I mean, we uncovered a travesty actually following Jean Vile's death in appalling circumstances and a senior level inquiry at London Hospital. I mean, she was a young mum dying of cancer at 35. I buried her. We were involved at the heart of all of that when it appeared in the national press. And you saw the whole machinery of the state, with its religion of health inequalities, absolutely letting down this family and all the complications of poverty. And we decided not to be worthy about it, but to do something about it, to build the first integrated working model, that realised that 70-80% of the determinants of health are nothing to do with doctors. It's to do with the social determinants of health. Do I have a job? I mean, if you get a job, that effect on your life can be massive. Do I have a home that's not damp? Is the school any good? I mean, our schools are full of ideologues running around, many of them. Are my relationships with my family okay? How's all that working? And health has so much to do with all of those things. And what they now call social prescribing, which we actually invented in Bromley by Bow, we didn't call it that, was through doing we began to realise that we needed, as a church community and as a group of people actually, revisit the central question: what is health?
That's incredible. And
Three words.
For that project, the social prescribing project, which has now become widely known, you actually won the Albert Medal for.
We did. My principal colleague, Dr. Sir Sam Evington, and I got the Albert Medal, which was very nice. And Sam's actually just been in Singapore with the health minister in Singapore. They came and visited the Singapore government. They've got 300 hubs actually in Singapore, social prescribing hubs. There's still more work to do on it, though. Don't set easy, because I think the business model that the civil service have created is all wrong. And it's because, again, our civil service don't know anything about business or business models or thinking that stuff through. So they often set up things to fail, actually. You've got to stay 41 years and dig in and get into the detail. So the detail of all of this, Rachel, is really, really important, and persistence over time.
Yeah. The long obedience in the same direction is what I'm getting
Staying
from
with
you.
the detail.
Yeah. People often with who trade in ideas and possibilities, they like to change location, they like to change ideas, change tacts. But what inspires me about you is that you've got ideas and big vision and anything is possible, but also you've stayed the course.
So Christian tradition reminds us to do anything of any substance involves sacrifice and cost and is painful and difficult. I think there's far too many people running over the surface of things, pontificating here. Social media is full of it. I turn it all off. I haven't got any time for it.
So when you and I were introduced earlier this year by a mutual friend of ours, Julian D, he did say to me that without you, the Olympics probably wouldn't have been located in East London, the 2012 Olympics. How did you go about influencing that? Because that's a big vision.
Well, it wasn't just me, it was a small little group of us. So what happened was, the person who really started the Olympics and cared about that question in 1999, which is when we had our first meeting at Bromley, was a person called Richard Sumray, as a matter of fact, who was a Labour councillor in North London and also involved in the Olympics movement, who came to see me and someone called Paul Buckell, who was a member of my church, but also was a geneticist, professor of genetics at University College London, ran all the genetics departments, and came and did a secondment with me for 6 weeks, so-called. He never went back to UCL, he became my director of regeneration. Then he stepped sideways and we built a £100 million company together down the Low Lee Valley. And Paul, who grew up in Forest Gate, got like me, really interested in the future of this bit of East London. How do we really make it work? And because he was a very clever boy and an academic, he brought all sorts of disciplines that some of us didn't have, which was great. And he's still with us, by the way, still working with us on stuff. It's now, he reminded me just the other week, Andrew, it's year 30 in March. I thought, oh my goodness. It was only meant to be 6 weeks. But what happened was, Richard asked to come and have coffee with us, and round the round table in Bromley by Bow, began to wonder about this question. Richard said, look, I think we should take on Paris in 2012. You know, I said, well, actually, they're going to win it. They're on the, you know, IOC list, the International Olympic Committee list, and, you know, anyway, let's dream dreams, let's wonder about this thing. And so he said, well, where's there enough land? And I said, well, the only place with enough land is the 248 hectares of derelict lands across the road from our buildings in Stratford, where all the trains used to turn around and go back north, actually. But it was all a mess with Tesco trolleys in the 6.5 miles of waterway that straddled the Lower Lee Valley. And that there was this whole history, because these were the waterways where all the small businesses operated that served the Royal Docks just down the road, down the Lower Lee Valley. And the Royal Docks, before we had aeroplanes, served the globe. They ran our empire, you know. So there was amazing history around us, all forgotten for 60 years, of innovation, entrepreneurship, small business development. So I said, actually, if you brought the Olympics and put it there, it could trigger a memory and take some of the stuff we're doing around innovation, but take it to another scale. So, and by the way, Reg Ward, who did some of the original work on Canary Wharf, actually, always described as a water city. And he said, I said, well, why don't we call it Water City? Because actually we need to join all the waterways from the Royal Docks and the Thames and the River Lee, the second biggest river in River, join it all up with a vision. Why not call it Water City? So we had this great ideas, your moment, lots of coffee. And then you go out into the real world and thinking, how on earth do you start? And so actually a friend of mine called Ian Hargreaves at that time was, I think that got to that point as the deputy editor of the Financial Times, was had been a member of my church in Kingston. I said, well, I'll introduce you to the architect Richard Rogers, who I know. And Richard at that time, who I didn't know, was just doing the Millennium Dome, if you remember. He won the bid to rebuild all that. And so I ended up going to Richard's house, which was a rather impressive Georgian house, in Royal Avenue near Sloane Square one Saturday morning. And we arrived at this door, a traditional London house, and it was a stainless steel door, and I think, I wonder what's behind that door. And when the door opened, you were into this massive cavernous room with a stainless steel staircase and an original Andy Warhol on the wall. I'm thinking, I think that's maybe a real one. Anyway, Richard came down these stairs and we had this little conversation, and I shared with him the opportunity to really build a mixed community that would be at jobs and skills and housing and a real legacy and a water city, actually. And, you know, and I said, look, what I need to check with you, Richard, that this isn't totally crazy and risky, and I don't want to go public with it. So he was quiet for about 10 seconds. He didn't say much. I thought he maybe thinks we are crazy. He then said, because Richard's built some of the biggest things in the world and is, you know, was a great entrepreneurial architect. And he said, actually, Andrew, that's exactly the correct idea. Otherwise, Ken Livingstone will build a glorious social housing estate all over that valley, which is the last thing we need. I'll join you. And so will my mate, Mike Davis, who's just finishing off the work on the dome, actually. Mike was a great guy. So we all met and we started to work on the first document, which we have. Finger in the air. Where would you put the stadium? Where would the cycle track be? Where would you know all that stuff? And because he was a Labour peer, he began to gossip to Tessa Jowell, who actually opened Bromley by Bow's new health centre in 1997, so she knew our work, actually. And to Tony Blair, who obviously was then the Prime Minister, and Tony was an entrepreneurial kind of person. And one thing led to another. And then I became involved in it for 19 years, actually from day one, and Paul did. And Paul and I wrote a lot of the work for Hazel Blairs, who actually led the legacy. It wasn't Tessa Jowell. It was Hazel Blairs who did the work on the legacy and was responsible. And she actually called Paul and I in when we'd won the Olympics to say, how do we create the first legacy company in the world? And we wrote a structure for that. And I was then asked to be on it, and I chaired the regeneration piece for quite a long time with a person called Margaret Ford, who was a Labour peer, who was actually, and we built a team. And Paul was then employed to be the regeneration director. So, but I suppose the one critical moment for that, so we, you know, if you don't step forward, guess what? Nothing happens. But there was a moment, I was in a car park at that point when they were announcing the winner, when I still, to be honest, in my heart of hearts, thought it's going to go to Paris. And I was standing there in the car park and listening to the BBC News, you know. And suddenly when they announced in Singapore, London, I thought, Oh my God. Where do you start?
Yep. I think that's great.
I
And
was
it
a slight
started
panic
with,
at that point, thinking, my goodness,
yeah,
yeah. A
and it
story.
started with a group of people to dream a dream.
And believed, and fundamentally, who stayed with it a very long time and who cared about the future of East London and wanted to build mixed communities, not all this silly Guardian nonsense about gentrification. We'd say as practitioners, gentrification, bring it on. Gentrification rhetoric in the Guardian in their posh offices by King's Cross. I've been there and seen who these characters are from people who've never built anything. What we wanted in the East End of London was not more social housing estates with people unemployed and families in dependency cultures and difficulty. What we wanted was high quality housing mixed with jobs and skills, joined up health facilities, nice parks, all of that stuff, and actually aspirational environments actually. Could people, why can't we just go for stuff? And we wanted people living next to bankers and business people, and we wanted to build that kind, as we did with our housing company. We want to build these mixed communities because then schools become successful. So I'm rather tired of all this easy ideological Marxist logic that you get coming out of some of these areas. People from our universities who've never built anything. Paul and others who surrounded our team learned about this stuff and began to dump all the ideology years ago by just getting practical. Learning by doing.
Well, we're all very grateful for the legacy of the park. And among other things, because of the mixed cultures that do live on all the really nice housing, there's some incredible food at Hackney Bridge. Anything from anywhere around the world. Well, that's a regular.
We've always thought food is the way into things, actually, of everything. And if you notice, we made sure all the big brands went in Westfield, and then a lot of those smaller outfits, the small SMEs and all that stuff. East London is a global community, so we need to celebrate that. And that means, as you quite rightly say, you then got all the food you can go and taste. And so that was the point, really. It's one of the first businesses we built in Bromley by Bow in the church, actually. It was a little cafe with a local mum called Sue Fox. And we called it Pie in the Sky, because we thought that was a good name for a church-based cafe. And it had a big bloke eating with a too big a belly. It's called Pie in the Sky. I.e., we began to discover that the way into that community, and the Bengali community actually, was food.
I think Food and Flags is incredible. It's just the start though, isn't it? I mean, if you look at all the different various stages of truly integrating communities, at the end, the utopian is obviously partnership. Between people who think very differently, come from very different places, have different things to integrate.
Well, I think many of our families and in Bromley by Bow, we've all got to know each other, over many, many years. Our children have grown up together. Indeed, Sam's son, who was 2 months when he first came into the nursery, is now 31 and one of our GPs now. He's now in charge of Sam, who was one of our principal GPs. I.e., the next generation is sort of coming through. But we've all known each other's families. Zenith Rahman is the vice president of Bromley by Bow. She's a Bengali woman of family who we've known for years. One of her sons now runs a business just up the road. And, we were about families and relationships. We were fed to the teeth of these ideologues campaigning and coming through East London who never built anything and never did it. Go away. The word becomes flesh. Do something. Get your hands dirty. Stop chattering.
And the word flesh in itself was such a blasphemous word and shocking that you're always going to come across people, dissenters and people who will resist what you're doing. But obviously you've been able to overcome that. And from Bradford to Kingston to Bromley by Bow to the House of Lords, just make that link for us. How did that come about?
Just a thing to say about dissenters, because obviously in an East End housing estate, you've got all sorts of views and all sorts of people. And you have to come to terms with that. But often when you get to know people, which you spend time having a cup of tea together, and often some of those concerns, some of them are mad or whatever. We get what I call the mad, the sad and the bad in any walk of life, actually. But actually you find real genuine concerns, actually. And we began to bring a lot of those people together. Why not enable that idea to happen? Let people own it. That's how we ended up building with local people 97 businesses. We often are not paying attention, really. People are sometimes being difficult and awkward, a bit like probably I was seen as the enfant terrible in the early days by the local authority. Simply because they're not going to put up with the nonsense. And as long as they're not just campaigning and sitting around and don't understand the issues and want to do something practical, I'm going to take them seriously. But I'm not interested in these people save the planet, yet they won't help us plant roses in the park. No. You'll only start saving the planet by sorting out these 3 acres first. You know, are you going to do some hard work or are you going to witter? You know, there's a sort of... Anyway, I just wanted to make that point because often many of these people can be real allies in the building of the future, actually. We do need to get to know each other a bit. You know, dissenters...
I think that's a huge leadership point, because you have to find people to dream with, but you also have to listen and truly hear the dissenters, because there's value in there. You have to dig for the gold. And as you said, you've seen time and time again that they have become allies.
They have. And we've all learned from each other. No one knows everything. We only know a bit about things, all of us, me included, and I'm still curious and I'm still learning, you know. But maybe if we just align forces and work on stuff, all our minds will change, actually, on practice. I suppose the last point on that is that in all our communities around the country, and, you know, there's lots of possibilities that I worry we're not seeing in plain sight, because we're coming with too much ideology and the glasses of the left or the right or all this nonsense that we picked up about you. Dump all of that, take your glasses off and look, get interested in people, get curious and be practical.
There is a lot more to be done, and people need to see the possibilities.
They do.
And try, give it a try, go build. So how did you get to the House of Lords then?
Yes, well, this was all a bit of an unexpected occurrence in 2007, so it wasn't something anyone, Milkman's son from Bradford, expected. But so obviously we were involved in all of that stuff, and a lot of things were happening, and I suppose we're having lots of visitors from around the country, and by that time probably internationally, actually, and I'd done various speaking tours in Australia and taken a group to South Africa and various things, and Japan. So, funny enough, a local doctor put my name forward during the Blair years to the House of Lords Appointments Commission, and then I got contacted about whether I'd send my CV and some background to who I was. So it's a bit of, oh my goodness, what's all this about? And I didn't know very much about what the House of Lords was about, and so I did send that in, and then I didn't hear anything for 6 months. So I thought, well, that's not going to go anywhere. And then someone rang me up. I was literally out shopping with my wife, actually. And they rang me up, you know, as you are, you're nonchalant looking at the shops and all that stuff. Would you come to next Tuesday to an interview at the House of Lords Appointments Commission in Westminster? I thought, oh my goodness, what am I meant to prepare for? Am I suddenly an expert on the British Constitution? I don't think so. Yeah. And so I put my suit on and, you know, looked smart. And ended up there in a room with Douglas Hurd and a number of senior people who I'd seen on the television. And actually what they were interested in, they'd read the CV, but they wanted to check that my background was who I said I was. And also that I would give time and engage with the House of Lords and be around it a bit. And that I was serious about that. And I said I was serious about that. So they weren't interested in any political or other views. It wasn't about them. I'm an independent crossbench peer, so no one's trying to tell any of us crossbenchers what we think or whatever. If they try and do that, it works the other way, so it's a very bad idea. And then I left and didn't hear anything for maybe 12 months, actually. So I thought, well... And then, again, I got a phone call out of the blue from someone from the Appointments Commission saying, the Prime Minister would like to give your name to the Queen. Would you be happy for him to do that? So I'm thinking, I suppose so. Yeah.
I suppose so, yes.
Yeah, okay. And then quite a long period of time left when I didn't hear again. This went on over 2 years. One Monday morning, we'd built a whole office complex by then at One London Bridge on the river, where we ran a whole operation there. And I was busy rifling through my papers and trying to sort something out. And the phone rang, and this lady on the other end of the phone said, Andrew, I just need to privately tell you that you've just been appointed as a crossbench peer to the House of Lords, but you're not allowed to tell anyone till it appears in the London Gazette, you know, which might be a few weeks' time. And so I said, well, can I tell my wife? Well, you can tell your wife, but you can't tell anyone else. So that's how the strange journey into the House of Lords as a crossbench peer. And then, fortunately, when I was introduced by the architect Richard Rogers, because I worked with Richard, and by Baroness Cumberledge, who was a Conservative peer, who'd helped us a lot and was a real expert. She's recently retired from the House. Julia Cumberledge is a great woman, and she'd been a great supporter of ours and deeply cared about midwifery and many, many years in that issue. And I wanted to give the House a sense that I was truly independent and worked with many different parties. And so I was introduced, and then you get into an 800-year institution and into a learning by doing environment. And the only way to do it is to sit and listen and watch. And then you discover that the real people to take seriously are the people who say less than the people who say more. you know,
Interesting.
and who really knows what about what. Because on the crossbenchers, you have people who've run the judiciary and been judges for 40 years or whatever it is, or an airline pilot, or, you know, have been around. And you have other politicians and some who talk a lot. And I always, myself, have had a rule of thumb: more is less and less is more. So you find yourself in this really interesting institution that works, and like some debates going on at the moment about hereditary peers, that the more you get into it, the more I'm in favour of it actually as an appointed chamber. And the more you want to care for it and take care of it, we will lose it at our peril, you know. And the House of Lords does detail and scrutiny and asks very awkward questions about practice. So I'm rather at home in that environment. I like it.
And are you able to forward your cause? Are you able to help people to, within the House of Lords, to see what is needed and what needs to be done?
So it's a great privilege to be in the House of Lords, and there's lots of people, and it's complex, the British state, and it all arrives there in the Houses of Parliament. So you slowly through things you get to know people. If you look on my website at Andrew Mawson Partnership, you can see some of the speeches, but I only speak on things I know something about. I don't want to chatter on everything, because I'm not an expert on everything. I know a few things about a few things, and in the House of Lords you're wise to become known for certain things on the basis of what you've done rather than what you've endlessly talked about. And the House tends to know who knows what about what. I sit nowadays on the Built Environment Select Committee. We have a major national partnership. Our work is now going national through a national social business I'm chairman of called 360, which is a whole national team, and we have a major national partnership with Barrett Redrow and a number of major businesses as we grow the thing nationally. So I have a responsibility as the new planning legislation, for example, at the moment comes through, to speak and engage with that. How do we make this stuff work? If we're going to build 1.5 million homes, how do we build communities rather than just houses? How do we not repeat just the mistakes of the 60s and 70s? Because I tell you, unless we're really careful, we will be in danger of doing precisely that. I listen to governments and politicians telling me lessons are going to be learned. I don't believe it. Lessons are not being learned, and I've led seminars with the Treasury for Rishi Sunak, and I know that there isn't memory in the system of what's gone on before. So it's a live, dynamic situation, government, you know, and you need to be on its case. So for me, it's about trying to nudge it and encourage it in whatever small ways one can.
And is there sort of one lesson that you're really keen for people to hear, that you're not seeing being implemented, that you've lived through? If you could just give one lesson.
I think one lesson is to believe in yourself and do stuff. Be bold. Build the road before you. You know, walk into the future, even though you may not have a cent. If you believe it and you walk it. You know, I worked with Paul Preston, who was for a while, and I got to know him in the early days of Run by Bows, the American entrepreneur who brought McDonald's into Britain. And you might hate McDonald's, you know, but actually it's a really interesting business model, actually, McDonald's, who, by the way, Paul was really keen that actually if you got a job in that business, you could be on the front counter, and you could also, if you worked hard, work your way up and become the managing director. He was really clear about that. But he at the time was working on one shop in Woolwich, actually, worrying away on the practical detail about where do I get the chairs from I can drag across the floor 600 times a day without the leg falling off? Where do I find the tiles that don't crack by month 6? How do you get the meat arriving? How do you make one thing work in granular detail properly before you build 2,000, however many it is, I don't know, a lot. But my point is he understood the business thing about getting one thing right. The micro is the way into the macro, yet often the public sector thinks let's build 2,000 schools and 2,000, and then half it doesn't work properly because they haven't understood one in detail. And I think that has a lot to do with the parables, actually. The parables are also about getting real about the person in front of you, the small detail, the thing that didn't work, telling stories about it, unpacking it. It's that detail thing. Entrepreneurs know about that. You know, and if you look at some of the most successful businesses in the world, they were usually started with people that persisted over time and really then did understand the granular detail. And sometimes it's a real privilege, I have to say, to sit in the House of Lords with colleagues, some of them, in worlds I know nothing about, you know, because they've spent 40 years. And you listen to it and you think it's a bit like a living newspaper with some people. And you think they really do know a lot. And I had no idea about that particular thing. They only know it because they've been engaging with it and made mistakes in it, by the way. All of us have made mistakes over time, and discovered the inside of a thing rather than the exterior. And discovering the inside of things matters.
It does. And I think that pursuit of excellence in the detail is truly important, because it's only when you test something or you implement it for real that you can then tweak it before you can scale. But I know a lot of people, and I work with a lot of people who want to scale things before they've even got it right in the first place.
Correct.
You can't scale something that's not exceptional.
Correct.
Because whatever you scale gets multiplied.
And then it all falls apart and gets into difficulty and all of those things. And all of those things that we should know about, because history out there teaches us these lessons. These are not new lessons.
I like that point about be bold, start something, and then get excellent in the detail.
And work hard. So, sorry.
Absolutely. Well, here's some questions that might entertain you, stump you, but in any case, you have to pick one or the other.
Okay.
So let's have some fun. The first question is, science or art?
Well, I love both, and I work with Professor Brian Cox nowadays on science, and I've learned a lot from Brian, who is absolutely curious and very entrepreneurial and gets all of this stuff. So I love that. But I've also spent my life working with artists, actually, and when we brought that big development together with the V&A and the BBC Orchestra and Sadler's Wells and £400 million UCL investment, which was all our ideas on the Olympic Park, that brought entrepreneurship, science and engineering, all entrepreneurship all together.
Incredible. Well, I think Professor Brian Cox will be proud of you for not picking the arts over science. So what about recharging at the end of a busy week, alone or with family or friends?
So my wife is retired now, so we have a cottage in the Cotswolds. We run a manor house nowadays in the Cotswolds as part of the national operation. And so I tend to go there, have a bit of space. I'm president of Bromley by Bow now, so I don't have to manage it. It has a chief executive and a board and a whole team of people. And because we are now building a national organisation, I also need to escape a bit from it all. And so I go home, and my daughter's soon to have a baby, so we're all quite excited about all of that. So I'm starting to think about prams again. I'm discovering that the technology of prams, all my children are adults, you discover all the world's changing. So I tend to spend time with the family, and then my younger children, who are all quite, younger, in their 30s, and 20s. And so that's where we tend to be. The balance of work, I'm sure we've never got it exactly right. Ask my children, they'll tell you the truth.
Well, I think the safe thing is to take the word balance out, because it's not something to aspire to.
You can never get everything right, can you? But
so here's one. Would you prefer an afternoon with your peers in the House of Lords, or taking a 21-year-old flying in a helicopter above East London to inspire them to start and build something new?
The helicopter ride.
There you go. That was an easy one for you. Do you do your best work late at night or first thing in the morning?
I'm a night owl, actually. I'm a twin. My twin brother's a morning person, but I'm a night person. I have no idea why this is, but I am a lot better at writing speeches and putting stuff together on a night, when sometimes if I'm been mulling over something and want to put a speech or something together, sometimes it will appear in the middle of the night and I have to sort of write it or do it then. So I don't know why that is. It's a clock. It's always been like that. And if you try and adjust it, I don't find that possible. So it's a strange thing.
So you're more of an owl.
I'm more of an owl. Yeah.
Okay. So our final question of the day, hugely appreciative for your time, Andrew, is what one meal could you eat every single day of your life?
Oh my goodness. That is a really difficult. I mean, I love Indian food. I grew up in Bradford, Amir Hussain, my mate from Bradford, takes us to great restaurants, because there's so many restaurants. There used to be one Indian restaurant when I lived in Bradford in the early days. There's a lot now. So I love Indian food.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've learnt a lot, and I hope those listening will pick up on some of those great leadership insights. Thank you, Andrew.
Good to be with you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Shift podcast with me, your host, Rach Ivers. Do check out the show notes for any relevant websites and also my email address, and get in touch if you've got any questions. Share it with your friends and family and maybe chat about it over a good cup of coffee.